Okay, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. So today I have with me photographer David Butow. Now, this is David's second time with me on the podcast. For those of you who want to learn about David's career and everything he's been doing in his amazing career and when we met in China for the first time, go to podcast episode number 10. Then you'll learn everything about David. But today, David and I are really just going to be talking about the election because, David, you just came back from the Republican National Convention. How was it? That was fucking loaded.
Yeah. I don't know how long is your podcast, Ryan? I'm not sure.
I have 14 hours and 35 minutes. We can talk about it.
I'm going to do it in under 12. I promise. So I was thinking about this actually before I went to Milwaukee. I was saying, what is actually the first political convention I went to? And I was amazed. I amazed myself that it's been 40 years. I actually went to the 1984 GOP convention in Dallas when Ronald Reagan was running for re-election. I was in college. I was a college intern at the Dallas Morning News. So I go back far, a long ways with all this stuff. So, of course, it's impossible not to kind of compare the experience in Milwaukee with the one that I had when I was a kid, and 19 years old or something like that.
Politics just seems batshit crazy now. Now, as a disclaimer to you, I'm a Canadian and I'm not allowed to vote. So I'm kind of like in this country, but watching like a live circus unfold. And it really does seem absolutely crazy. Now, when you were here last time, we talked about January 6th and we talked about the insurrection at the Capitol building. You were there photographing it. People were hurt, people died. It's crazy that the Capitol building could be stormed like that right in the heart of Washington, D.C. Like, just makes no sense. And I just feel like the crazy hasn't stopped. And then we have an assassination attempt. And then Trump gets the nomination for the Republican Party. And the highlights from the RNC event itself just looked crazy. I mean, what was it like to actually be there?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I'll get into that. It was, I mean, you mentioned January 6th, and for me, both personally and then thinking about things outside of myself, but just the political science aspect of it, which is, I was a poli-sci major in college and have done this on and off kind of my whole career. It's impossible for me to separate what happened on January 6th with my experiences at this last convention last week, because it was clear that Trump he organized his crowd back after the election in 2020. He had primed them, telling them ahead of time that the election was going to be rigged, and then when the results didn't go his way, he had two big rallies in Washington, D.C. at the end of the year where he kind of primed the crowd, and then announced on January 6th, when the Congress's job was to certify the results of the election for Biden, he basically sent his crowd to the Capitol to break the whole thing up, and they almost did. And I was right in the middle of that crowd. So here he is again, the Republican nominee, and trying to reconcile all that it's pretty difficult.
I mean, what was the atmosphere like in that convention center?
I think there were two prevailing moods that I noticed. One was just happiness. People were just excited. I think they felt that this was before Biden dropped out. So I think that was announced 2 or 3 days after the convention was over. And so, Biden was an extremely weakened candidate the week of the convention. And so I think everybody felt like their victory in November was going to be assured. So people were upbeat. And then you had the aftermath of the assassination. So there were a lot of people, Trump supporters, who I think have, an almost religious-like devotion to him. So the fact that he got away with just a cut on his ear from what could have very easily have been a fatal shot, I think that, there were many speakers and there were people in the crowd who said or felt that was some kind of divine intervention. So part of what I wanted to do as a photographer was to try to get some sense of that. This is not just a politician who people admire and who people that they support their policy, his policies, it goes beyond that. It goes into this, not with everybody, but with some people, with like the sense of worship.
Well, I just watching it from a distance. I was here in LA when all that went down, and yeah, just like people on X and Twitter, saying how he pumped his fist and was badass, and he had the American flag behind him. Actually, I think that was Mark Zuckerberg's exact turn of phrase, was like that's the most badass thing I've ever seen. And Mark Zuckerberg has probably never voted Republican in his life. I don't know for a fact, but Silicon Valley is pretty left leaning, and I found that interesting. And you're right. There's this whole like divine intervention, like thanking God that he's still with us and can still, challenge for the presidency. And all of this sounds just batshit crazy to me, because like, just the fact that there was an actual assassination attempt on a presidential candidate who was previously the president, in Milwaukee, or no, it was in Pennsylvania. It just seems unreal. I don't know what it is about politics in this country, but it just, who's writing the script?
Well, no, and I mean, yeah, in the last 4, 5, 6 years, it's been, anybody who would written a script like that would have been tossed out. If you tried to sell it to Hollywood or something. I'm borrowing a line from somebody there, but yes, so many things have happened that were just unbelievable, and so I think that was the first time that Trump made an appearance at the convention. I think that was, it was on Monday night, and I think that was the first time he'd actually been out in public. If I could be wrong, but I believe since the assassination attempt. So, he came in and he sat. He showed up every night, which is kind of unusual anyway for a presidential candidate to be there every night at the convention. And so there was a special place, kind of in the stands, that was sort of at the far on the opposite side of the podium, where he would sit often with his family members or with guests every night. So that's what he did on the first night, is he, sort of made this grand entrance and, had the big bandage on his ear. It was very dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there might be audience members listening to this who are not American or don't understand U.S. politics. So what is the Republican National Convention?
Okay, so what it is technically, so the two major political parties in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans, have a nominated convention the year of the election. So it's always held in the summer, so it's a few months away from the big election, but it is where they formally nominate their candidate for president and vice president. Now, 99% of the time, that's going to be known ahead of time. There's a long primary process that takes weeks. So each party has a chance. People in that party, they go state to state and they make their choice about who they want to be the nominee. But it's formalized at the convention. And so every now and then during these conventions, sometimes who's actually going to be the nominee is sort of up for grabs. That has happened occasionally, but most of the time it's set. And of course, this time it was already known.
So for anyone else who's watching out there, while all this chaos was happening, the United Kingdom called an election, and 60 days later had an election.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And with no fanfare, and just 60 days of hard campaigning and messaging, and Rishi Sunak lost, and Labour's back in, I guess. And it just that contrast of like how the United Kingdom called their elections, and then went through the process of getting the message out and campaigning, and then having the election, and then having it over. While I feel like this election has been going on for 4 years or longer, and it's nonstop, and everyone's always talking. It's insane.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a fascinating contrast. And one thing about U.S. politics is that the political parties never miss a chance for sort of free TV and free publicity. So traditionally, what they've done with these conventions is it's usually over 4 nights, and so it becomes a TV show. So it becomes sort of like free advertising for the party, where there's speakers every night, and they usually speak for 5 or 10 minutes. So it's a whole large group of people that get cycled through, and it's a chance for the party to kind of stake its claim where they stand on various issues. So the idea is to raise support and energize their own voters, the people in their own party, and then maybe change some minds of other people who are undecided about the election, if they like the way the party comes down on certain issues, they might end up voting for that candidate. So that's really what it's designed to do from the party's standpoint. And it's a very slickly produced event. The stagecraft, everything, the music, everything is just dialed down to the smallest degree.
Mm-hmm. And plus a little Kid Rock and a little Hulk Hogan to go the distance.
Yeah, that was weird. The Hulk Hogan thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because that's in my video. But yeah, I mean that's having thought of it since being at the Reagan one in 1984, how much the party has changed under Trump. I think it's very much less a party about ideas than it is about a kind of a showbiz sort of mentality.
I believe so. I believe it's wild. Okay, so as a photographer, as a documentary photographer, as a photojournalist, as a photographer, you fly from LA where you live. You just live a few blocks away from me. You fly to Milwaukee. Like, who are you shooting for? Why are you shooting? Did you have the chance to skip this assignment? Did someone ask for you specifically, or did you just feel like this is going to be batshit crazy and I need to be there?
It's more the latter. I mean, I've felt very since I covered Trump's campaign in 2016. I spent a few weeks at the end of that, right before the election in 2016, in the upper Midwest in the U.S., which is the swing states that kind of like matter, most in the election. And then when Trump won, to many people's surprise, including mine, I knew this was going to be a really interesting time in American politics. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was there the entire time that Trump was president, stayed through Biden's inauguration, and then moved back to California. So I haven't been super eager to dip back into it since then. But now that Trump was renominated, he's running for president again, I think there's still a pretty good chance he could win. I just felt that it was important to kind of get back into the game. And so I work with a photo agency called Redux Pictures, who's able to get me credentials, and there are 3 or 4 of us with the agency there in Milwaukee. So yeah, that's the capacity that I was working, shooting stills, sending it to my agency, and then also shooting some video. Yeah.
And I mean, what was it like? So you fly to Milwaukee. You're at your hotel. You're packing up your cameras. You got your badge. You go down to the convention. I mean, what's it like walking into a convention center of like 10,000 people, like screaming for Trump?
Yeah. Well, you usually get in there a little bit early, so things haven't totally kicked off. But there are afternoon sessions, which a lot of the conventioneers don't show up for. And most of the people at the convention, I don't know about most of them, but there are about 4,000 delegates. So they're the ones who are actually voting for their candidate. So it's all organized by states.
Okay. Okay. So the delegates choose the nomination, basically. So they choose who's going to be president, or who's going to be running for president in November.
Yeah.
And there's 1,000 of these delegates, but these delegates aren't politicians or members of the House or members of Congress. They're totally separate.
I think there are some that might be members of Congress. I'm not positive about that. There might be some overlap there, but for the most part, they're just ordinary citizens, and there are about 4,000 of them. And so they all sit together with people from their own state. So the way it works, it's usually a winner-take-all situation for each state. So you'll have the West Virginia delegation, you'll have the New Hampshire delegation, et cetera, all arranged in different parts of this arena, which is where the professional basketball team there plays. Mm-hmm. So it's a big venue. It's all been very crafted, like a really good concert or musical performance that you've been to. Mm-hmm. The stage is really very well lit. Everything is designed with very slick screens, so you can put different graphics up. Yeah. So it's designed as sort of a TV show. Mm-hmm. So you sort of feel like you're on the set of a TV show in a sense.
And I mean, is there drinking? Is there eating? Like, is it just like a full party, or are people like really trying to like do politics?
It's mostly a party. And so there's eating and drinking like outside the arena itself. And then so you have people who are, they want to meet people that are using it as a networking opportunity, either for political reasons or for business reasons or whatever, or personal reasons. And so, I did get that sense very much that people were really in a pretty elated mood.
Mm-hmm.
They felt Trump was almost certain to win. Biden looked weak, and then Trump had just survived this shooting. So, you really got that sense of kind of a party atmosphere almost.
Can you imagine if Trump actually was assassinated, what the mood would be like at the Republican? They would have had to cancel it or postpone it or something, right?
Yeah, I don't know what they would have done, actually. No, it came very close to that scenario.
It's crazy. Like 2 weeks ago, it was Biden versus Trump. And then 2 weeks later, Trump almost dies or gets killed, assassinated. And then Biden drops out. And it's funny, everyone's like, oh my God, we can't have these kinds of changes 4 months before the election. And then I remind people well, the UK just did it in 2 months. So, don't get too excited about being American and having 3-year-long election cycles. But it's really interesting that how different everything could have been.
Yeah, I've actually wondered what would have happened if he'd actually been killed, and how they would have found another candidate that quickly. At that point, I don't think that he had announced J.D. Vance as his presidential candidate.
Right.
So there wouldn't have been a natural person to step into that role.
Now, in your book that you made back in 2016, the Brink
2021 started in 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's Brink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You were following Trump on the campaign trail.
Mm-hmm.
So you were at those rallies, like the one he got shot at in Pennsylvania. What's the atmosphere like at those rallies when you were following him around?
Well, it was especially in that year, it was pretty energetic because he was he was a new candidate at the time, and so I think a lot of people who had been following him, let's say for a few months on social media and watching things on TV, I think in a lot of those cases, they were seeing him for the first time at those rallies in 2016. And I imagine now, because Trump's done so many rallies since then, that probably a lot of people in the crowd have already seen him at least once. But it's I did have a chance to talk to some of the photographers who were covering that rally and who took some of those amazing photographs.
Oh, really?
The aftermath of the shooting. Yeah, they were all there in Milwaukee. So I know them, and had some interesting discussions with them. Got some more detail, but I think that one thing about when Trump is when he's doing these public performances or speeches, there's always a teleprompter, but he often goes off script.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not sure what you're going to get. You might get a short, kind of disciplined Trump where he's sticking to message and he's in and out in 20 minutes, or he might just decide to ramble on and on, which is kind of what he did in Milwaukee. And I was watching the teleprompter in Milwaukee. There was a big one behind me. So it's sometimes during Trump's speech, it sounded like he was making things up on the spot, and I would look back and I would see the words just stop. The scroll had stopped on the teleprompter. And so clearly he was just injecting some of his own thoughts, into the speech.
Did any of the photographers who were at the Pennsylvania rally where the assassination attempt occurred, did any of them have anything to say to you that hasn't been already discussed in the news?
I don't think so. I think that they've all been interviewed here and there, and so I don't want to put words in their mouths, but it was interesting to get some of the technical details about what their experience was, and Doug Mills from the New York Times, who actually has a frame where the bullet, the one that most likely hit Trump in the ear, is actually in the picture. You can see it in the picture. Oh. And the reason that he was able to get that was because he was using an unusually high shutter speed because of the lens that he was using. This getting into photo nerd talk here, but it was just kind of a fluke, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but they did an amazing job, I have to say. And those pictures are going to end up being, some of the most iconic political pictures ever taken. And in fact, for those of you, I don't know if you saw this, but for those in your audience who watched Trump's speech, he started out his speech by talking about his own experience during the assassination attempt. And above him and on the sides of him, very large, were projected those still pictures that my colleagues took.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's it is crazy that, I mean, who was the last president who was shot at? Was it Reagan?
I think it was Reagan. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that was the last one who was actually shot at. Yeah.
That's fucking crazy.
No, it is. It is crazy. I mean, there are a lot of people with guns in this country, and so yeah.
And a few audience members were also hit in that Pennsylvania rally.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was terrible. There were two people who were pretty seriously injured, and there was one man who was killed. And so, yeah, it's very sad. So for Trump, it was a brush with death. But these other people, obviously, and their families are it's a permanent situation for them. So
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's wild that something like that can happen basically on the world's biggest stage.
Well, yeah, and I mean, obviously, I think it was today the U.S. Secret Service director resigned. I mean, I'm sure she wasn't involved in the minutia of the planning for that particular rally, but those at the top take the heat for things, and clearly there were a lot of mistakes that were made. So,
yeah, the buck has to stop somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Trump has his assassination attempt, gets grazed in the ear, and then what, like 72 hours later, they have the Republican National Convention, and he gets nominated for president, which was kind of like a rubber stamp thing. You're there for all 4 days. Like, what are you really seeing amongst the audience? Like you said, let's go into this a little bit more. You said there was like this kind of divinity around him. Like there was like, he was placed there by God because he avoided being killed in his assassination attempt.
There are people who believe that. I don't share that view, but there were people who were articulating that, during the speeches. I mean, Franklin Graham, who is the son of Billy Graham, the late Billy Graham, who was probably the U.S.'s most well-known kind of religious figure in at least the second half of the 20th century.
He had one of those mega churches.
Yeah, he had a mega church, and Franklin Graham has had quite a storied history. You can Google that one. But he was one of the speakers on the final night, and he just straight up said that Trump survived because of the will of God. So, that to me implies some kind of a, divine connection to this person that you wouldn't, I mean, to my way of thinking, wouldn't necessarily associate with the better angels of our nature. So.
Yeah, I mean, the United States has a strange relationship with religion, right? I mean, some people are really religious, and then you have other kind of offshoot religions, but this idea of like religion in politics is very strong, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I mean, particularly in the Republican Party, which tends to be almost entirely Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were some Orthodox Jews at the convention, I should point out. I could tell just by the way they were dressed. And there were people who had kind of like, I think I'm not sure what the signs read, but it was pro-Trump signs with Hebrew text on it. So there, it's not 100% Christian, but sort of the Christian, vibe is very much a part of that group of people.
Yeah. Now a lot of people would kind of associate the Republican Party with like white, Caucasian males. Like, did you see that at the convention? Was it a multicultural event, or was it pretty heavily Caucasian and male?
It was pretty heavily Caucasian. I wouldn't say it was heavily male. I think it was, I mean, I couldn't tell you. It seemed maybe it was about split 50-50-ish, maybe a little bit more skewed towards males. But yes, yes, heavily Caucasian compared to the rest of the United States. I mean, I think Caucasians in the U.S. are like 50+% or something, so a little more than half.
Mm-hmm.
But there it was, probably more like 90% or more, something like that.
And I mean, as a photographer going into that convention center after assassination attempt on the presidential candidate, are you nervous at all? Like, are you thinking like, wow, someone's going to blow this building up, or someone's going to take another shot at him and I'm a little too close to the stage?
It felt like the safest place on planet Earth, actually. So, there's always a lot of security around these things, and this one in particular. So this is that was held in the middle of downtown Milwaukee, and for several blocks in each direction from the arena, that was like an initial checkpoint. So there's one area where you can't drive your car into, but you can walk without a credential. And then a couple blocks later, you'll get into, you have to go through a checkpoint where you need for the press, we had just for that convention, a Secret Service credential that has like a RDIF technology in it. Okay. And then it's got a QR code that gets scanned. We put our stuff through X-ray machines. So that's the first level. And then you walk a couple more blocks and you get to another security checkpoint where you kind of do the same thing all over again. And then you get into the arena. But each almost like each sort of doorway you pass through, just about, there's somebody checking your credential. So there are different kinds of passes. There's a pass just to get into the building, but it doesn't get you on the floor. And then you need to get a pass just to get you onto the floor, that kind of thing. So yeah, I felt super secure. And there was it just seemed like when Trump was present, there were more plainclothes agents around him than you would normally see.
And you can identify the plainclothes agents?
They're pretty easy to spot. Yeah, they're the guys in the suits who aren't moving around a whole lot and then pretty serious. So yeah.
And I mean, it's I've never been to one of these conventions, but obviously the political system of the United States kind of fascinates me as an outsider looking in. I mean, just the money of renting out that arena for 4 days, and having all these people fly in from all over the country. It just seems like the money is staggering.
It's staggering. And yeah, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on these presidential campaigns. So the money that for those conventions, it's paid for by the political party. So, the candidate has their own funds for the race, and then the party itself has its own slush fund to use for, various down ballot candidates. They can use it for some ads for president, and then they use it for the convention. So, yeah.
It's crazy how the fundraising works. And I know that as Biden was kind of slowly dropping out, there was so much discussion around what would happen to the Democratic candidate if what would happen to the Democratic funds that had already been raised in the name of Biden and Kamala Harris, I think, and what would happen if the ticket changed, and if those funds would have to go back to the donors, or whether they could use them for another candidate. And it turned out that money was specifically earmarked for that candidate. So if the ticket changed, then the money would have to be returned, right? And of course, that's the first rule in politics: is never give back the money.
Right. And so I think they were trying to avoid that. But yeah, it's getting into the weeds there that's beyond my knowledge. But yes, something like that. And I think that because it's Harris now at the top of the ticket, and she was still part of that 2-person ticket, that they're able to just take those funds and transfer them, to her new campaign, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy that it has nothing to do about the platform or your stance on major issues, domestic or international? It's all about who is earmarked for the money.
Well, I think that, people are donating this money presumably because they agree with the stances that these candidates are taking. So it is tied to that, I think you could say. But
I think some of it is, but I think people just donate Democrat no matter what. And I think it's like they have extra money, or they want to participate in some way, shape, or form, and they have to go red or blue, and there's only 2 choices.
Well, in fact, and you don't have to go red or blue. You can go red and blue, and a lot of people do that. There are a lot of people, wealthy people, who donate to both parties and both candidates because they want to get invited to the parties. They want to get FaceTime. I mean, purely in those cases, it's just it's just a self-serving thing. They just want to be connected and want to, have somebody owe them something in one way or another. In fact, I read today, I believe this is going to turn out to be correct, that Donald Trump donated to Kamala Harris a couple of times before she was vice president, like when she was running for offices in San Francisco. So he did that. I mean, he donated to Hillary Clinton back when she was running for Senate, and I'm sure he was donating to Republicans at the same time. So
just for access.
Just for access, sure. Yeah, it's money talks, right?
Do you know who famously? I think it was in the 2020 election. The Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX CEO, I think he was the biggest donor on the Republican and the Democratic side in one election, which is ridiculous. And the funny thing is that once FTX went bankrupt, none of those political donations came back into the bankruptcy fund. They were all just...
Oh, is that right? Yeah, right. Yeah. Just
yeah.
Right.
So if you're going to donate, make sure you do it with other people's money. Oh, terrible. No, but one thing that people don't really seem to understand is before 2016, when Trump had his first round, before 2016, Donald Trump ran for president like every fucking year, only as a way of promoting his TV show, The Apprentice. And not a lot of people really remember that. Like every single year, like 2 years before the presidential election, he'd come out and be like, yeah, I'm going to run for election. I'm an independent. I'm going to do this. And then he'd get tons of media attention for 6 months or 8 months. And then he'd drop out and just, use it as a pump for his ratings.
Yeah. I mean, he talked about it. I don't know if he ever really got to the point before 2016 where he filed, where he took it that far. But I mean, if you go back and see some of these interviews with him in the 80s, for example, I think Oprah asked him about this when he was on her show in the 80s. Would you consider running for president? He said yes. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, it can be a vehicle for people who are trying to, get attention. So even if they're not that serious about it, which,
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think like, imagine, so you and I have both traveled the world. I lived in China for many years. You've traveled with your photography everywhere. You've been in war zones. I mean, what do you think Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are thinking when in 1 week there's a presidential assassination attempt and then Biden drops out of the presidential race? Like, what are the people who would consider the United States an enemy or a competitor, friendly or otherwise? What do you think they're thinking of, like, what's going on? Because it is batshit crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I don't know what kind of like emotional judgment they're making about it, but certainly just from a strategic standpoint, when there's this kind of instability, it's, it makes the U.S. more vulnerable, and it diminishes this country's ability to project power and strength overseas. So it's not a good situation to be in, of course. Yeah.
Which famous president of the United States said a house divided amongst itself cannot stand?
It's probably Lincoln.
Might have been, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing the Civil War president.
I think so, yeah. I'm just that's from somewhere. But again, like when you have this kind of vicious infighting and the polls are 49-51 and you're just seeing all this craziness, and people are taking shots at these leaders. Is it like real shots?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like going back to 84. So that was, that very first political convention that I went to, and Reagan's reelection bid, which he ended up winning. And I think he won 49 out of 50 states, which is amazing when you think about it. How polarized the country is now. And I mean, everybody knows now, like, California is not up for grabs. It's going to go blue, right? Just as an example, okay? But it shows you how different the country was in those days, how many more people were willing to vote for somebody in a party that they wouldn't have normally voted for. So that makes me sad in a way, is that we're so locked into our team, if you will, as Americans, that there are very few people who are flexible in that equation. And I mean, the stance on issues then was pretty far apart, and now it's, I think that I mean, I guess I don't know if it's more far apart now, but the way people think about politics now, where it's our group, and then and the other side is the enemy, And when Reagan was president, the Speaker of the House most of that time was Tip O'Neill, who was a liberal Democrat, very pro-union, just sort of classic kind of FDR-style Democrat. But he and Reagan were about the same age. There were these, older Irish guys, and they met just socially frequently, and they were able to get a lot done. They were able to make a lot of deals to pass legislation through Congress, and ended up benefiting everybody, and was celebrated by both parties. And that kind of cooperation, you just don't see that anymore.
No, I mean, when Trump was in the White House, could you imagine him having breakfast, like a working breakfast with Nancy Pelosi?
No, you cannot. Definitely not imagine that, right?
Yeah.
And it's seriously, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi because she's really emerged now, as maybe the strongest kind of behind the scenes figure to convince Biden to drop out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I forget how old she is. She's in her late 70s, I think, and she's going to go down, I think, as one of the strongest and sort of most powerful, most organized speakers of the House in U.S. history.
Mm-hmm. So back to the Republican National Convention. So, I mean, as a photographer, like, you're in there, you're trying to make beautiful imagery, capture the moment, understand the people, understand the mood, and find visual examples of that. So, I mean, what was one of the first couple things you're looking at? Are you trying to find the people? Are you trying to find people that are recognizable that the public will know? Are you doing the crowd and trying to find just quirky little things that might get into a magazine or something like that? Like, where's your first focus, and then where do you kind of go once you feel like you've locked down some good shots?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and that's exactly what I think about when I decided I'm going to go to this, and then on the long plane flights over there, and then as you're getting ready, you start to think about, like, what do I actually want to do when I'm there? And one of the cool things is that with the photographers, the 3 or 4 photographers from my agency, and a couple of them were on assignment, so they had their own agendas for those publications. But we were all doing something a little bit different. So there was one photographer who comes from a wire service photo background, and so his orientation is to get pictures of all the speakers, to get those shots really that are kind of like the record shots of the event itself, and look out for the most important people in the room and that kind of thing, and to get different angles during these different presentations and all that. I'm less interested in that, and I'm happy that he sort of takes the burden off me being inclined to do that. So I am looking into the crowd. I'm less interested in the speakers than I am in just the ordinary people who've showed up at this convention. And what is the social interaction like? What is their mood like? And that's what I'm trying to dig through.
Yeah. No, it's super important. You really do have to, I think, like, when you're working on a big event like this, and I've done a few things. So, like, when I was with the New York Times in China, like, the Rolling Stones came to China, so we had a press conference, and then we had the actual event. And I had a checklist of, like, a few things I wanted to do at the press conference, and then I had a checklist of a few things I tried to do at the concert, right? Obviously Mick Jagger, bang, but obviously everyone wants to see Chinese people rocking out to the Stones. So you have to work the crowd. You have to find those pictures of people, showing enthusiasm, being excited, and because people think, like, wow, Chinese people like the Rolling Stones, right? And to be at the Republican National Convention, like, were there children there? Like, was it like a family affair in any way, shape, or form?
I wouldn't say it's a family affair. I did see a few kids here and there, but just a few. For the most part, these are all adults, and so the sessions would begin at around 6 p.m. every night, and they would go until about 10 o'clock. So, you'd find at the start of the session that people are starting to file in, and then there's the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. So everybody who's in there stands up, they put their hand over their heart, or if they're in the military, they salute, something like that, as the flags are brought out for that. So it has this sort of solemn beginning, every night. And then the music kicks in, and there was a house band that was playing, a cover band, who I have to say was really good. Okay, and so they were doing almost like note for note covers of Tom Petty songs, and just basically stuff that everybody knew, right? All these hit songs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so people are like dancing right away, and there's music going in between each speaker. Mm-hmm. So it has that feel of like a very it's almost like if you go to a basketball game, in between the quarters, right? There's music, and people are getting up out of their seats, and they're moving around a little bit, and then of course, because these are people who are interested in politics, it is true. It really is a networking opportunity. So you find people who are trying to link up with others from different states, and maybe they just are friends, or maybe they want to sort of solidify some business deal they've been talking about. that kind of thing. So you get that sense of the dynamic.
Right, because the Republicans wouldn't come together at any time after that, right? Because then it's kind of everyone just goes back to their own states, and then you know, in 4 months you vote.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the big chance. Yeah, and it's only every 4 years. So
was there like a green room or behind the stage access or anything like that you guys had access to?
So not really any behind the stage access that I had access to. There is off the floor. There are different large rooms that are kind of screened off that are set up for the media. So like off stage, just outside the floor, there was one. We can even maybe put this up. I did shoot a little bit of an iPhone video of this. A room where the still photography organizations, so the wire services and different newspapers had editors with computers. So there were like maybe 30, 40 people in there at least all the time, you know, just banging away, going through all these photos, and everything's connected, you know, so they're able to upload, you know, there's Wi-Fi, and then some photographers were uploading in different parts of the arena by connecting their cameras to a hardwire that was then going into that room.
Oh, wow.
For the editors to scroll through. So yeah, so you could, you know, when you got a little tired of being on the floor, you could just go off in that room and just sit down and relax a little bit. I mean, there wasn't like space to hang out, but you could just at least put your gear down and then take a few minutes.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Like I don't think normal people understand what those rooms are like. I mean, some, like for the big wire press agencies, like sometimes they'll even have an editor sitting in there editing. So the photographers will just come back, drop off a card, and then go back out.
Yes.
And then that guy or girl, that editor will put the card in, go through all the pictures, edit them, send them out, get the next batch, and it's just like a machine.
Yeah, it is a machine. That's exactly what, and everybody's working really hard, especially, you know, during the session, because you have a different speaker every 5 or 10 minutes with a little bit of a break in between. So there's just a lot of pictures to move all the time. Yeah.
And what did that feel like? Like, you know, because you said like some of your colleagues were there on assignment, so they had a magazine or something that they were working for, and they had a specific angle. But you were there because of your own personal interest and because you documented so much of this previously during Trump's last run. Like, what did it feel like to kind of be there and kind of be free to look at whatever you wanted to look at?
That was great, and that's really how I wanted to do it, because it's a lot of work doing something like that. So you really, I mean, I think that unless you're just doing it as a gig, it's just like any other gig. In order to really put yourself into it, you have to sort of be committed to what your mission is. And in this one, I just felt like my mission of just trying to go and try to make the kind of pictures that I wanted to make. And a lot of that I was just going to figure out on the fly. That's really how I wanted to do it. The very first day it was just sort of a fluke. I ended up doing a very short and specific assignment for a German publication. There was a colleague of mine who had it initially, and he couldn't make the convention. So I ended up doing that. So that was kind of cool because on the first night, I had at least a little bit of a focus. So I was looking for those sorts of pictures, but then at the same time, I was also looking for the stuff that I was interested in, which was, I mean, well, yeah, we can get more into it, but you know, having been to a lot of these, I was really trying to figure out what was different, or if there was something different about this one, and try to photograph that, try to make some sense out of that visually.
No, I think that's interesting because a lot of people don't know that photographers a lot of the time are going to these events without an agenda and without an assignment, you know, in their back pocket. Like you, I mean, you've dedicated a large part of your career to following Donald Trump around and understanding what people around him are doing and what, you know, what kinds of policies and what kinds of platforms he wants to get elected on. And I find that, you know, I always felt like when I was a photographer actively, you know, having that freedom to just kind of wander around and look for strange, beautiful little moments, I always got my best work done versus when I had a specific agenda, because then I felt like I was kind of in tunnel vision. And then, of course, you're missing stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that the more you can tune in with your own sensibilities when you're out observing, the better it's going to be. If you're, I mean, there's sometimes when you're working on assignment when you know the editor's looking for some specific things, just like what I mentioned before. So then you feel like you're kind of a hunter on behalf of some other vision in a way. But if you're able to spend most of your time trying to discover things for yourself and then figure things out for yourself and then come up with strategies to communicate that visually, that's like, to me, that's where the excitement comes in, where the real sort of challenge of it comes in.
And were you on the floor of the convention the whole time, or did you get up and like up into the stands and just see like the normal people who might have been there?
I got up into the stands a little bit here and there, just to kind of like look for some different perspectives. But I find most of the time I like being down on the floor. I mean, it can be super crowded, like really like absolutely shoulder to shoulder. And you're, it's just like, everybody's been to big rock concerts, you know what that's like. And so that's kind of how it is a lot of the time. It just takes you, a while to get from one place to another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, where do when you're at an event like that, and the entire arena that you're in, the convention center, or where you said it was the basketball arena, right, where the Milwaukee Bucks play. So you go to this place and everyone is just bleeding Republican. Like, this is like, do you ever feel like maybe there's a real dissection between like where the press corps is versus where the people on the floor are? Like, how can I say this better? Like, I guess I feel like, were there a lot of like left-leaning journalists that were just kind of like, what the fuck's going on here? Or, because I'm sure there's a lot of Republican journalists as well, or journalists that are reporting to Republican news outlets, and they had to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But did you ever feel like the press, the other photographers were just like, this is batshit crazy?
The word crazy might have been, I might have heard that once or twice. I would say that, I mean, I think a lot of the mainstream press in the U.S. has been, or the mainstream media, or whatever it's called, whatever that really means, and I don't know what that means anymore, but
everyone outside of this podcast.
I think, there has been, it probably skews a little bit center left. Okay. Compared to the 46% of the country that tends to be pretty loyal to Trump, or I don't know if I'd go that far as to say loyal, but supports him. So, but you do see, I mean, Fox News, obviously they have a big presence there. Newsmax. There's some other recognizable kind of like media blogger type people from right-wing media. So you see the whole gamut, and you do get the sense that those people, like those bloggers and people like that, they're kind of like personalities in this crowd. So they're recognized and people go up to them and they want to have selfies done with them. But then I also saw like one of the reporters from CNN who was walking on the floor. So, a lot of the GOP, they don't like CNN, but nevertheless, people wanted to occasionally take a selfie with her. And so I didn't get the sense that there's any kind of like tension, and that's where you're going with that. I mean, there might be some internal tension, some mental tension, but it doesn't play out. It's generally pretty civilized down there, and people are not really talking shit about one side or the other for the most part.
That's what I was getting at.
Okay, yeah. No, I didn't really hear it actually. Yeah.
It's like a Cowboys fan going to a New York Giants game and having to be surrounded by New York Giants fans, right?
Because something like that. I did grow up in Dallas, so I was a Cowboys fan, but yeah, kind of. But in the sense of like you're there for if you're a journalist like me or whatever, you're there you have a professional reason for being there, and I'm used to doing it, so I don't go in with some kind of an attitude of yeah. I mean, I'm just used to being in all kinds of crowds, and so it feels pretty comfortable for the most part.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this a little bit too in our last podcast, episode number 10 for anyone out there. But when we were talking about just doing the job and kind of turning off various parts of your brain and just focusing on the visual imagery of what you're there for and stuff like that, like we did when we were covering the earthquake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't. I mean, covering the earthquake kind of requires another level, I think, of separation of your emotions with the work. This one, you don't, I mean, for me, I didn't feel like I needed to do that too much. I mean, having been, I was thinking about this actually, and the last time I was, because I haven't been covering any of the campaign this year up until last week, the last time I was with a large group of Trump supporters was on the steps of the Capitol in January 6, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Very violent, very, disturbing situation. So, those 2.5 years, or however many, more than that, have passed, 3.5 years. So, there was a little bit of a sense of, I don't know if apprehension is exactly the right word, but that's a little bit of a concern I had about just the possible sort of shock about being back in there around all these MAGA people.
Well, I mean, you definitely have PTSD from what happened on January 6th. I mean, it affected you in a pretty serious way.
Yeah, I don't know if I have PTSD from it. I mean, I think it was pretty shocking for several days afterwards, and I think I was able to sort of like talk it out and get over it and everything. And then a lot of that gets channeled into the work and putting out the book. It became a big motivator actually for me publishing my book Brink, which came out a year later, because that was sort of the natural conclusion to that whole arc of his presidency. Not the natural conclusion. I mean, it was the conclusion. And so, so going back into it, I think I really approached it more from a sense of curiosity. It's one thing, when I went to the GOP convention in 2016, which was in Cleveland, Ohio, there were a lot of people at that convention who were not Trump supporters. They were sort of more like what I would call ideological conservatives, fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, okay?
Feels like they're all gone now.
A lot of them are. And the people like the Ronald Reagan-style conservatives who were very, anti-communist, wanting to project power, very much a believer in like, let's spread American good, democracy at least around the world. That was, a big, his motivation. That's not really to be found in this current crowd. And, Trump's pick for VP, J.D. Vance, is kind of an isolationist. Mm-hmm. And he's very skeptical of using American power that way. I mean, I don't know how deeply it's sought out from an intellectual standpoint. So my point, though, is that, to echo what you just said, though, is there's a big gap between not just Reagan Republicans, but those in 2016. So, I just had a sense of curiosity, given everything that's happened, given J6, Trump's conviction, the documents case, which was, I think, quite serious and which was tossed out by the judge in Florida, the federal judge, a week or two before the convention started last week. That's a whole nother set of circumstances that didn't exist even in 2020. So who are those people who are still supporting him after all those things that happened, and why? Mm-hmm. That to me is like a pretty good question.
I think, well, from reading and trying not to be too involved in everything that's going on, because I don't really have a horse in the race, and I don't have a voice apart from this. But like, it seems like a lot of people who support Donald Trump thought that those events and those court cases and those convictions and, that was all pretty politically motivated. And I think that they see that as kind of ugly. And even though he was convicted and had clearly done a few things wrong, and that whatever that was kind of blown out of proportion and dragged through a political process and not a judicial process. That's what I understand Trump supporters feel about that situation. That's not my own.
Yeah. I think that's right, and I think particularly that's the case with the felony convictions in New York, which were about the hush money payments, and were really, it was almost like a sort of like a business crime in a sense, right? Because of not to get into the weeds with that, but yeah. Whereas like the documents case, it's pretty hard to make the argument that was a politically motivated prosecution. And you think of like the AG Merrick Garland, how long that took. We're basically like, it's almost 4 years after all that happened. Mm-hmm. And it's this, all these cases in the Georgia election case are still, ongoing. So, but I guess that is the attitude a lot of those people. And I think that, part of the reasons they have those attitudes is because the way the media is balkanized and how people are getting fed just sometimes, just outright untruths, about what's actually happened and about what the process is about. So people form conclusions that are based maybe not on fact a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's, have you ever thought about like how dangerous this whole thing is? Because like I don't really, I'm not too bothered either way which president of the United, who's going to be the next president of the United States, male, female, Trump, Democrat, Republican. But the thing for me is this buildup around Trump is like really scary, because he basically took on these kind of politically motivated criminal cases against him, and he kind of came out unscathed. He had assassination attempt. He came out not dead. Then kind of, he crushed Biden in the debate. Biden was barely there, so not much of a win, but still a W. And if he goes on to win the presidency, like there's going to be this kind of superhuman element around him, and I think that's terrifying.
I agree with that. Yes, I do. It is amazing, like how Teflon-y he has been. It's incredible. I mean, it's a combination of being, having a team of lawyers to go after every possible thing you can think of. Maybe some judges that were, favorable to him for whatever reason. Yeah, and then then you have the assassination attempt, and so you said superhuman, and you almost did get that feeling, particularly on the final night, like when Hogan comes out there, and then this whole character, it's just sort of like a comic, right? It's like not in the haha sense. I mean, like a comic, like a Marvel comic style character, right? Where and so it almost, with that association, Trump almost becomes like that. And I think in the minds of a lot of people, he almost does have this sort of superhuman quality, that he survived all this stuff.
Yeah. Like it like the way the media has played it out and the way these events have kind of gone in his favor, it does seem like there's some big WWE finale coming soon, and it's going to happen in November, and he's going to rise up and take the belt, and it's like, for all the stuff that's happened in the last 8 years, but also too just in the last 3 months, it's insane.
Yeah, totally. I mean, given his his penchant for sort of authoritarian tendencies, and his interest in kind of forging friendships with people like Orban in Hungary, and these sorts of figures, pretty non-democratic figures. It is very concerning,
But
so,
butting up to the wrong people, maybe.
Yeah, well, that's my view as well. So, yeah.
Do you want me to drop you with my conspiracy theory of the day?
Sure, I'm all ears.
So one of the things that Trump has been promoting for the last few months on the campaign trail is that he's going to end the war in Ukraine. And he's friends with Vladimir Putin, apparently, and he's going to turn off the tap and stop funding Ukraine in their war against Russia. Now, this would obviously bring some peace, and it would force Ukraine and Russia into a negotiation, which no one has been able to do thus far. For everyone out there, war is terrible. Russia has invaded Ukraine, taken a huge part of their territory. So I guess for any peace negotiations to happen, they would probably have to assume that Russia will eventually take part of Ukraine, and that has to be okay, and that's what the peace will be based on, perhaps. But I read something the other day that was terrifying, and they said that someone, like maybe the powers that be, tried to take out Trump because he wants to end the war. And of course, the war is great for the defense industry. So this military-industrial complex, needs to keep these weapons going to Ukraine, needs to have this funding coming from Congress in order to keep the grease flowing through Washington. And turning off those taps is dangerous for them, and then maybe that's why maybe someone wanted to take him out. So that's a total conspiracy theory, but it's out there, it's circulating, and I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When these events kind of happen, you find a lot of people sort of reverse engineering what the circumstances could have been that might lead up to a guy taking his rifle on the rooftop of a building and trying to kill Donald Trump, a 20-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So to me, I mean, I don't see a connection there. I mean, there are a lot of 350 million people in the United States, and a lot of them have some strange ideas about how to be famous, and I think that was just most likely that was his way of doing that. I mean,
let's hope it's an isolated event.
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
Was there any chatter at the Republican National Convention about the assassination attempt, or any inside baseball stuff that was being talked about there?
Not really. I mean, there was, people were talking about it. I don't remember any sort of inside baseball stuff about it, but certainly, I mean, obviously, the Secret Service came into, a lot of criticism about what happened. Yeah.
It really is just surreal. Like, as a foreigner living in the United States, it's like, I'm just looking for like a calm place to just hang out and like do my work. And then, you open up door number 1 and it's a fucking circus, and you close it and you're like, oh, Jesus. And then you open up door number 2 and it's a bigger fucking circus, and you're like, oh, Jesus. And it's just like following this, like living in this country during an election year is batshit crazy.
Yeah, and this is the craziest one that I can think of. That's for sure. You picked some year to move the United States, I tell you.
Well, I missed you.
Yeah, I think like 1996. That was pretty low key, actually. Yeah, that was the last time that I can think things were really low key.
That was Clinton and George Bush Sr.
That was Clinton and Bob Dole.
Oh,
so he was even more calm. So that was right. In fact, that was really the one year that I can, because Clinton, he first won in 92, and that was like a new generation. He and Al Gore were, at the time, they were guys in their 40s, and that was sort of like a new day, baby boomers sort of taking over, right? And then he won re-election easily against Bob Dole in 96. And then in 2000, you had this, crazy Al Gore, George W. Bush thing where the election, the results of the election weren't known for several weeks afterwards.
Because of the Florida ballot box.
Because of the Florida ballot box. So that's really like, in my recollection, that's when the crazy started. It was like 2000,
Mm-hmm. But Barack Obama, like, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I felt like Barack Obama kept things calm.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was, when you think of when he took over in 2008, that was right during the huge global financial disaster. And so people were really scared and really hurting. And I think there was a sense of unity and kind of a fresh start when he became president. And I did go to Washington, D.C. For his inauguration, and I was just photographing out on the mall where just ordinary people had come to watch it. And it was very upbeat. It was a really cool experience to be there. It was, super freezing cold, but it was very exciting. And then that, I think that goodwill lasted for a year or two, and then things got more complicated after that. But yeah, those were some of the times you look back on and think things were a lot more calm back in those days. Yeah.
I mean, as an American citizen yourself, are you reminiscent about those calm days? Like, would you like to see some of them come back this way? Because it just feels like, you know what it feels like? It feels like there's too much money in crazy, and everyone wants crazy.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes. And so I wonder, like, what it's going to be like to get back to things where things are a little bit more calm. But yeah, to your point, I mean, that's particularly like with social media and things where people are people who just want to be well known, let's say, or they want to be famous for something, and they're kind of interested in politics. They then use politics as their vehicle, okay, to get famous or to try to make a lot of money or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Somebody like Alex Jones, let's say, right? So, politics was his vehicle, but if politics didn't exist, or he might have picked something else, maybe it was sports or whatever that he could talk about and get all people riled up about. But, a lot of politics stuff, it cuts close to the bone. It affects people's daily lives, so they're very emotional about it. And then you find people who sort of take advantage of that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And, so there are a lot of incentives there for the loudest, most extreme voices to get heard and to get amplified.
It's funny, so as a foreigner living in the United States legally, I might add, that one thing that I'm kind of pissed off about is seeing all these illegal immigrants coming over the southern border. And I'm not just talking about Mexicans. Like, these people are coming from all over the world, right? and people are going to Mexico on vacation and then coming into the United States, and they're being given like work permits, like to start working and all this kind of stuff, like almost immediately. At least this is what I'm reading in the news. I should invite someone actually onto the podcast and have a chat and get some real firsthand information. But it seems like people are just coming across the border illegally and getting a chance to like stay and work and live. And I had to go through like a whole process. I needed a lawyer, had to make an application and blah blah blah. And it took like 6-8 months to sort it all out. For people to be coming across and just somehow just getting a free ride does kind of piss me off a little bit. But that's really the only thing I could complain about. Yeah. Have you done any work on the Texas border?
Not in a while. I did many years ago. I was down there a fair amount, but I haven't any recently. Yeah. Obviously there has been a huge border crisis in the last year or two, but for various reasons I never got down there to shoot it. So yeah.
It's interesting. Like, are you you're a photographer that has global interests. You've been in war zones. You've worked a lot in China, which is where we first met. Is this assassination attempt and Biden dropping out of the race, is this getting you interested in U.S. politics again as a photographic narrative for your work?
I think so. And for me, the challenge is to try to find different ways to describe it and different photographic techniques and styles to employ that illuminate the situation somehow. And it's that part is like it's not that easy. And you have a lot of people right now, a lot of photographers who are interested in this subject and who kind of like want to explore this visually and kind of put their own mark on these events and what's going on. So they're all like doing it in different ways, and I mean, there's like sort of a stock, standard sort of photojournalistic way of doing it. And then there's other more, maybe more alternative, experimental ways of doing it. So for me, coming a little bit more from a straight background, but now being less interested in repeating those styles, it forces me to try to come up with new ways of showing it. So one of the things I did when I was in Milwaukee was shoot video. So I was doing still pictures mostly with flash whenever I was close enough and able to do that. But then I was also, I had another camera that I was just shooting video on. And then I just finished a short film today. In fact, the editing of it, it's converted to black and white. It's in slow motion. There's no narration over it. There's just some music. But it's more of just like a tone poem. But it kind of describes, in a way, my impressions of being there. And just sort of what it felt like to be down there on the floor.
I think that's exciting because, I've been following your work for a long time since we met. You shoot, I think it's fair to say you shoot majority black and white.
Yeah, I mean, not really these days, probably a little bit more color, but I still shoot black and white a lot. Yeah.
But the thing I like about you is like, I feel like you're always got some small cameras. You've always got some wide angles. You're always just kind of looking for strange angles, and looking at your photos, you're a real like thinking man's photographer or thinking woman's photographer, like thinking person's photographer. Like you're kind of waiting, you're kind of hunting, you're waiting in the shadows, maybe down low, maybe up in a corner, and you've got a small camera, you're just waiting for these little moments to happen and then bang. And I really like the reference you gave to one of your other colleagues who was, maybe had the long lens and the tripod and was just banging out all the speeches and all the podium, and you didn't care about that at all. You were just kind of drifting around looking for strange, beautiful little takeaways.
Well, thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's pretty good description of what I like to do. And a big, part of the motivation is like one of the reasons why I don't use telephoto lenses that much is because I prefer just to immerse myself into the scene, and I want to be the eyes of the viewer who can't be there. So there are people who are curious about what it's like to be down on the convention floor, but can't go. So I'm going to be their eyes for them, and I'm going to try to show them things that they might find interesting and to give them a sense of almost what it feels like to be down there on that floor, not just what it looks like, but actually like what that experience is like to be in the middle of all those people.
All the action, all the energy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes finding offbeat moments and then trying to do it in a way that somehow gives some sort of meaning to the whole event. And I think that was the hardest part for me. And I was just talking to to a good friend of mine, a newspaper photographer, about that this afternoon before I came over, and we were both sort of commiserating about how it took us a day or two of being there to try to, cut through the superficiality of what we were seeing to get into something that was a little bit more descriptive.
I think I think a lot of people out there who aren't photographers, like, this is a little bit inside baseball for them, but it's like, it's really true. Like, you can walk into a room and take all of the shots that everyone is expecting you to get, but if you sit around in the room for 2 or 3 days and you let people unfold and you let their guards go down, and then people start behaving a little bit differently and start being a little bit more relaxed, and they're used to having you guys around there, that's when you really start making your magic.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, doing something like the convention, because there is so much media down on the floor. So everyone in that arena is assuming they could be on camera at any second. So that kind of makes things easier in a way, because people aren't really reacting to you being there. Because just to give you an idea, I mean, you and I are sitting about 3 feet away from each other. That is like about the most space that you would ever have with on the floor, like with another person. I mean, usually there's somebody that's like 2 inches away from you, and you're, so you can be right up this close to somebody and taking pictures of them, and they probably wouldn't even really pay any attention to you.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's just people with cameras everywhere, TV, stills, everything. So
how hard was it to be a photographer at this convention and not have other photographers in your shot?
Oh, almost impossible. I mean, yeah, almost impossible. Yeah. And sometimes I want them in my shot, because I think that's part of it too. Mm-hmm. So like in the video that I mentioned, and in some of my still photos, I'm including other photographers and TV camera people in my pictures, because that's part of it. It really is a show at the end of the day. It's a TV show that people are still experiencing in a genuine way. And so recognizing that fact in the pictures, I think, is it becomes more true to what the event really is.
So you're on the floor with all the delegates. There's 1,000 delegates from 50 states.
4,000, yeah, I think.
4,000.
I think that's right.
We'll say it's 4,000. I don't know where I got 1,000 from. But yeah, so there's thousands of delegates, right? They're on the floor and they're organized by state. So which state had the most delegates according to you? Like, could you remember?
Well, it's probably New York and California. I'm not sure who has more, but yeah, so they had big sections, right? Yeah. So it is apportioned by population in the state. And I have to say that the New York delegation was particularly photogenic. There's just something about those people. There was just, there's just something about them. Some of them looked a little bit like they could have been in a Martin Scorsese movie or something. Just the look of the sort of in the attitudes, was really cool. The Texas delegation, everybody was wearing cowboy hats. I think every night they had their white cowboy hats on, and they had like their sort of matching like state of Texas vests on or something like that, or shirts, So yeah. So and then the people from Wisconsin, because it's a dairy state, they had these cheese hats.
I saw the cheese hats. Yeah. I thought they were going to a Green Bay Packers game or something.
I think they're the same hats as they were at the games. Yeah. It's just like,
I mean, it's funny that, the personalities all come out, and people like are proud of their state and proud of, these delegations. Whether you're red or blue, it doesn't matter. Like they carry a lot of state pride.
Exactly. Like in Hawaii, like their delegation, some of them had leis, and, they're sort of rocking their like Hawaiian sort of gear and stuff too. So yeah. Absolutely.
That's wild. It seems like a bit of a crazy party, but again, like, the fact that the RNC confirmed the nomination of Donald Trump, and 72 hours before he was almost killed.
It's mind-boggling. It really is.
And I'm surprised how fast the news has kind of like moved past that. Like I'm still struggling with that. Like I moved to a country where a presidential candidate was just killed and tried to be killed. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah, I think the media has moved beyond that, because you had this monumental event of Biden stepping down from running again, and then Kamala Harris within 24 hours basically emerging as the candidate who's going to take on Trump. That's a lot of news right there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a reflection in a way of the times that we live in, that something as close to monumental as one of the two major candidates for president almost getting killed, it's almost like that's just another check in the news events of this year and the last few years. It is pretty weird and kind of disturbing.
And it's happening so fast.
Well, yeah, and you don't know what the next shoe is going to be. All these shoes keep dropping of unexpected events.
To borrow a line from one of my favorite comedians, Ronnie Chan, who is a comedian on The Daily Show, but he also does stand up too, and he says, I'm not afraid of anything in the United States. He was talking about being canceled, right? But he goes, I'm not afraid of the United States. He goes, I came from 3 different countries with free health care and no guns. He goes, when I showed up in America, I showed up prepared to die.
Yeah, well, that's sorry, Ryan. It's things aren't always quite as rosy as the PR might indicate.
It's just, again, it's just like it almost feels like being caught in a circus and you can't get out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, and it can be tough on your nervous system too. People who really care about this stuff. I mean, I almost am in envy of people who aren't that interested in politics and don't start paying attention to the election until a few weeks or days or whatever before the actual vote, because they can tune a lot of this stuff out, at least mostly. I mean. But yeah, I mean, violence, I mean, I forget the number, maybe like 4 U.S. presidents have been assassinated and many others have had shots taken at them. And Gerald Ford, I think there were 2 occasions when he was, people were shooting at him. And then, and of course, RFK, Robert Kennedy in 1968 right here in Los Angeles, the same year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. So that year, 1968, it kind of, it still, I think, makes us pale in comparison, and of course, the U.S. was in the middle of the Vietnam War at that time, so that was a pretty crazy year. Then you had the Democratic Convention in Chicago in '68.
Oh, that was where the riots were.
Yeah. So yeah, and the DNC is going to be in Chicago again in about 3 weeks. So
are you going to cover it?
I'm probably going to go. Yeah.
I'm so like. I love your photography work and I love following your career, and I'm kind of excited that all this crazy shit's happened and that you're kind of considering, following this for the next couple months and seeing where it leads, because I feel like, your vision, the way you shoot, your dedication to the craft and all that, like, this is the kind of moment you live for, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, thank you for saying that. And I think that, as sort of the years go by and the more of the stuff that I do, I'm thinking about my work more and more in the historical context and kind of feeling lucky to be around and doing this job right now. So I sort of want to take advantage of it as much as possible and try to make pictures that will be interesting to people now, but more importantly, 50 years or 100 years from now. When I'm gone, and but there's a legacy there, and there's a document of what this period of time was like. So I'm just trying to put those facts into my pictures, and then on top of that, put the sort of the feel and a little bit of the zeitgeist of America at this time in history into my work.
Now, when you and I were both younger men, there were things called magazines, and they used to pay photographers like you and I good salaries to go out and shoot the world, right? And now there's no magazines anymore. I mean, as you kind of get ready to dedicate yourself to the next 4 months of this presidential election, are there viable outlets for your style of photography, which isn't really, which is kind of a little bit unique and a little bit more artistic than your kind of straightforward AP or press shooter?
I mean, there are, but there aren't that many. So I think that in previous elections, like if I was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, like when I still had a magazine contract, I might go and do the last 4 months of the election, go out on the campaign plane with, people and go to a lot more rallies. But this time I have to be more selective for those exact reasons, because there aren't the kind of budgets. And maybe you can get a couple of day rates here and there, but it's not going to be like a week or two of being out on the trail with all those expenses. So when I worked in 2016, at the last few weeks of the election, I did it very low budget. I just was out in the Midwest and like sleeping in a SUV a lot of the time, just trying to keep my expenses down as much as possible. So I'm not going to do that this time. And also what's different now compared to 2016 is that the Kamala Harris events are all going to be run sort of through the White House pool. So it's not the same as having a non-White House candidate. And it's harder to get into that pool unless you're part of it, unless you're part of the White House press corps, which I'm not right now. So the only candidate that I can photograph in a way that's a little bit, more accessible would be Trump. But still, there's still sort of a pool arrangement with this campaign. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's harder to do now, not just for the business reasons, but also just for sort of logistical reasons. So you compound that with, with the business issues, and then it makes it less accessible for me to do than it was before. So I have to be more selective. So that's why I like, 4 or 5 days at the RNC, same in Chicago. I can do a lot of work in a compressed period of time. Yeah.
And then maybe, and I guess maybe the hope is that someone sees your work from those two conventions and is like, well, we need you to keep doing this because it's gorgeous. And
yeah. I mean, that's ideal. Sure. Yeah.
And do you think, it's kind of strange that the Democratic National Convention is going to be back in Chicago, where people, where there was a historical riot in '68, right? And do you think that could be a hot point for any kind of activity? Like, are you going to kind of go into Chicago, defensive? Like, do you think anything could happen on the streets?
Yeah, I'm expecting it to be there be some, some protests that might very well become violent. I think before Biden dropped out, there was a lot of anger on the U.S. left and the groups who've been protesting Israel's action in Gaza, right? And because Biden was initially very supportive of Netanyahu and Israel after October 7th. So, there was a lot of criticism sort of what his administration specifically was doing in support of Israel. Now that he's not on the ticket anymore, I don't know how that's going to change the dynamic of protests. It's hard to say. So it's weird. It was actually the similar dynamic in Chicago in '68. You had anti-war protesters protesting against the Democratic Party because Johnson, was president, even though he wasn't running again. But he had, in '68, it was the height of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. So you had the far left wing of the party protesting the rest of the party. And that's who was going to be theoretically the same dynamic happening this time around. So I think a lot of people, myself and a lot of other journalists, had the expectation that there could be some pretty heavy-duty street protests. So now that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee, I don't know. I think there'll still be out there a lot of demonstrations, but we'll just have to see. But yeah, I'm going to take a gas mask and the skateboarding helmet that I've had for the last several years for covering these sorts of things. Absolutely.
When you were in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention, did you get out on the streets? Did you have a chance to talk to normal people who didn't make it into the convention? Was there any kind of scene out around?
Not really. I mean, there were a couple of like very small kind of demonstrations, but no, downtown was so closed off that like people were avoiding downtown. So it's almost like a weird like ghost town situation. If you take a cab or a rideshare car or something, it drops you off at the edge of this perimeter where there's like cement barriers on this ring for like, miles around downtown or sort of like in downtown on the edge of it.
Like the green zone.
Yeah, it's like the green zone in Baghdad. Yeah, so then you're just walking down the sidewalk, like almost nobody around, except the occasional other photographer or something. Yeah, so.
And they'll probably have the same thing in Chicago for the DNC.
Yeah, I think so. It's a little, it's a bigger, more congested downtown, but it's actually going to be at the United Center, which is not in the middle of downtown there. So, it'll be a similar setup. Yeah. So I did not have much of a chance to talk to ordinary Wisconsins, except for the people that I rode in with, the drivers of my Lyft rides and stuff. Yeah. Restaurant people.
What did they think about having the RNC in their town?
I think initially they thought it was kind of cool, and then it became a little bit of a pain in the ass just because of how difficult it was to drive downtown. So there were a lot of rerouting on the nav apps on their phones.
Right.
Yeah. So it's frustrating for them. Yeah.
This is wild, man. I'm super excited that, you were able to go, and I'm super excited that, this has kind of sparked to this second act, right? Because of you following U.S. politics. Because, you really have worked all around the world, and for you to be working in your home country means that some serious shit's going down.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Well, was there any kind of experience at the RNC that struck you that we haven't talked about, or anything that you wanted to kind of talk about that maybe?
In a way, I'm still kind of processing it, and it was interesting because I was filing my still pictures the same night that I was shooting them, so I'm looking at what I'm getting at the end of the day. And the days are like, you get out, the session is over at like 10 p.m., and then by the time you walk to a spot where you can get a car and then you get back to your hotel, it's like 11:30, and then you start going through your pictures. So it ends up being pretty late nights. Fortunately, you don't have to get up early in the morning. But I just started going through my video like in the last few days since I've been back, and just cut this one short video. So that's kind of fun too, to have like another way of experiencing it and seeing what I was seeing in the moment, but having a little bit of that distance, and talk about crazy. So on a Friday, the day after the convention was over, that was the day of the big CrowdStrike computer meltdown all over the world.
Oh, right, with the airlines.
Yeah, with the airline stuff. So, so I got hung up. So I got out on Milwaukee, but then I ended up spending like 24 hours in Atlanta because of this. So it was just, one event after another.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to say, it's interesting, at the airport in Atlanta, there were thousands of people who were waiting in these lines trying to get rebooked and all that. But everybody was really calm in general. And maybe we as Americans are getting somewhat used to these kinds of crazy events. And we've been through COVID. We've been through these crazy presidential elections that can get so angry. But for the most part, I find people are really like maintaining their sense of calm and dignity, which is pretty great. So
it's great, but they're also being sensitized to crazy.
Well, yeah, desensitized to crazy.
Desensitized to crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true too.
Which is never a good thing, right? Because then when you go abroad and you start talking or people,
crazy and just outright lies, and so and that's a a big part of why I'm still interested in doing and photographing this subject and talking about it, is because particularly like what happened on January 6, 2021, I don't want any of the historical revisionism to kind of get in the way, at least, from what I was photographing and showing, to try to undermine what the facts were, what I saw and what I took pictures of, and what was all available for the world to see on body cams, security camera footage, still photographs, TV footage of that day about what really happened. Because there are attempts for people to try to revise that and to mischaracterize what that whole thing was about. And a lot of people are buying into those lies and those myths. And I think that's the most dangerous thing. It's not just crazy. It's just straight out deliberate attempts to gaslight.
Undermine democracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there any crazy people like at the January 6th event at the Capitol building? Were there any kind of those crazy guys like all dressed up? Were there any of them at the Republican National Convention?
No. I didn't. No. People had some wacky hats and stuff, but there wasn't anything that had that kind of like, you didn't see, Viking guy wasn't there, and you didn't see anybody like in anything militaristic looking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Probably on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel the rest of the world is going to follow this along for the next kind of 4 months? Because you and I have both traveled abroad so much. I feel like we both have a pretty good idea of what the rest of the world is thinking right now about the United States. Because, I've lived abroad, you've traveled the world with your photography. I mean, it just feels like a real moment of like fear.
Yeah, I think so because I mean the U.S. is the one remaining superpower, and so what happens domestically and how much and in what form our government decides to project power or not, that has a huge impact. Obviously, like on Ukraine was maybe the most pertinent example of that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what people are thinking, but I'm sure there are a lot of very nervous governments right now and around the world, right? I mean, these alliances that have existed since World War II, right? Now being possibly under threat if there's a change of tact.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Donald Trump has been openly critical of Europe, openly critical of NATO, openly critical of Ukraine, and touting his friendship with Putin and stuff like this. Like, it seems like we're in bizarro world or something like that. Like, it just seems like the whole world could be tipped upside down if he really does kind of go out and push these isolationist policies through through Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he'll have full support of people in his party, I think, for the most part, if he wants to do that. So, in addition to, the presidential race, you have the Senate and the House of Representatives. And for your, foreign listeners, viewers, those are the two other branches of government. And so it's most likely the Republicans will take back the Senate just because of the just sort of who's up for re-election. They sort of have an advantage just from that standpoint, just the way the voting works. The House is questionable. I think the Democrats, the Republicans currently control the House. Their Speaker is Mike Johnson. But I think a lot of Democrats are hopeful that they might be able to take back the House. So I think there'll be a big difference in what U.S. policy ends up being if you have both houses of Congress, if Trump wins, and then you have both the Senate and the House being controlled by his party. That way, all the legislation, all these policies can get expedited. And then there's also this, and it's a whole other podcast, but like the 2025 project, which is something that's this Republican effort to replace civil service employees in the government, some like thousands of them, with political appointees instead of so that's just creates more a dynamic where you can just push through your own ideas much faster. So yeah, I mean that would be the most radical outcome. Trump wins, both houses of Congress go his way also, but he might win and then the Congress is split, or Kamala Harris might win, and so yeah, it's unlikely that even if she wins, that the Democrats will get both houses of Congress. So that scenario of that sort of trifecta is more unlikely than Trump getting it.
I kind of feel like we're in Beijing in like 2016 when Xi Jinping kind of like declared himself emperor for life. I feel like Trump is like almost there. Like if he wins this next presidential election, his ego and the stuff that comes out of his mouth, like again too, I can't vote. It's kind of strange, but again, you have this. He's going to have this belief that he can do anything.
Yeah,
and that's right. Terrifying, I think, because if you start to think that as a politician, and politician is all about bartering and compromise and coming together and bridging the gap and meeting each other halfway, like that is politics, right? But if you come into every situation, and just thinking like, I'm not going to listen to anyone, I'm just going to hit it out of the park every single time. I'm the best. That's no way to really run a country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's sort of how he's always run, not just the country, but his business. That's sort of his MO, right? Is to be central figure, and he doesn't want to make compromises. And so yeah, that is a scary scenario. I agree.
I mean, because if he does win in November, then he becomes president in January 2025. So then we would have him till January 2029. So we won't have quiet until January 2029, and then he might not even go quietly.
There you go. I mean, he didn't the last time, so there's no reason to think he would do it again, unless he's just feeling too old and too tired. But yeah,
I just hope that we can have we can usher in like a new generation of politicians who are just quieter.
that would be great. That would be awesome. Just a little more low key.
You know, I lived in Switzerland for a few years, and I never even knew who the president of the country was. And they had an election while I was there.
That's amazing, right? And I bet everything was fine.
Just peace of mind. You know, I really feel like the American psyche is just being twisted, turned, and stamped on. Like the average American psyche is just being riled up on a daily basis, and this just can't be healthy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Healthy as a country, and then healthy for people just as humans, right? You know, to get this kind of nervousness through your system, you know, every time you open up Twitter or turn on the news, it's not good for you.
No.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, again, too, we're both seasoned in this world, and like we both probably can think back to politicians in various countries. This one's also where politicians might have been a little bit soft-spoken and might have been a little bit humble and might have been a little bit country first. But now it's just all, you know, who can scream the most, who can spin the news, who can lie faster, and who can build their personal brand quicker.
Exactly. And all this, it happened pretty fast. I mean, it seemed like that dynamic happened in the last like 10 years or so, 15 years. I'm not sure what it was, but
It was Trump. It was Trump.
yeah. Blame it all on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think that dynamic was like kind of like those conditions were like in place, in perfect place when he ran in 2016, when he announced, you know, he came down that elevator. And that sort of show business element, that was so noticeable at the RNC, you know, showbiz. Just that's what it felt like, especially on the final night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made for the cameras.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, like, because I really feel like, again, from the outside looking in, that we're in this era of chaos that Trump has brought into this world. Like, whether you like his policies or not, whether you vote for him or not, that's not really what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at here is he's changed the entire nature of every conversation. And it's not about talking anymore, it's about yelling, right? And it's just about saying outlandish stuff that would never happen. Like again, I was living in China in 2016, right? And again, he was like, we're going to build a wall. You know, we'd never built a wall, right? And now he's like, we're going to have mass deportations. He's like, probably not. Like, you know, like there's all these like big ideas that's just throwing out there, you know, that never happen. And I think it just reduces the value of the common voter in their eyes.
Yes, absolutely. No, I completely agree. Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, just the idea of telling things, and this, you know, both sides are guilty of this, but just, you know, coming up with slogans that sound like they're profound or they mean something, but in the end, you know, don't. So,
you know, it's like everyone wants to make America great again, but like, let's do it elegantly and you know, maybe even be soft spoken about it. Is that even possible?
Yeah, elegance is not a word that within thousands of miles of anything I've seen recently. So at least as relates to politics. Yeah.
Okay. So back to your photography at the RNC. You're shooting there for 4 days. Like how many like select images would you file? So for people out there who don't know, photographers like you and I, we would go to an event like that. We would shoot all day long, maybe shoot 1,000 pictures, maybe 500 or whatever. And we would probably, on each day, we might pick like 20 that we that we would want to put out into the world and represent as our work, right?
Right.
So I'm just curious, like how, you don't have to tell me how many pictures you shot, but how many selects did you have where you're like, yep, that's my work?
Yeah, I would say that, 20 is about right per day. But I would say actually maybe even a little bit less. I was more selective on this one than I am usually, right? And I'm not sure why that was. Part of it because I was also shooting video and I was trying to divide my time. So like the first day I shot mostly stills, a little bit of video. And then the second day I think I shot mostly video and I didn't file much at all like on the second day. So yeah, I mean, no, that's a good question. And where some of my colleagues, I mean, they're sending dozens, if not hundreds of pictures every day, right? Because they're just doing everything from start to finish. Whereas I'm, like, to your point, I'm looking for things that are a little bit more offbeat, a little bit more unusual, and that's hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like I'm, in an hour, it's not like I'm getting like 10 great shots. I might get one, or that I like or whatever, something like that.
I just love the fact that you were at the Republican National Convention and then 2-3 days later you're here and we get to talk about it.
Yeah, well.
Unpack that trauma, baby. Unpack that trauma. I've gotten to the point now where I just hate all politics.
Yeah, I don't blame you. No, it can be really annoying.
Yeah. And people don't know, but I lived in China for 18 years and we have a communist party, so I didn't get to vote. And no one cared about it, what a Canadian thought about in China. And then I lived in the UAE and in Dubai, and we had a royal family, so I didn't have to vote either. And now it was amazing. For 22 years, no one talked about politics around me. And now you come here and everyone's just losing their brains.
Yeah, I mean, at least we still get to vote. I mean, for all our dysfunction in this country, at least all citizens get to vote. We do have a say in what happens. We don't have as many choices maybe as we'd like, and the choices that we have are not ideal, but at least there's still a system. And so you want to try to reinforce the candidates who value that system.
Mm-hmm. Do any of them?
Well, one of them doesn't seem to, so.
Where will you be election night?
I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to be. I think my birthday's right around that time. I mean, but
November 6th, right? Or 5th or 4th or?
Yeah, when the election day is. Yeah. I think it's the 5th. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so
because that's a huge point. That's a huge thing for me, right? Because if you do the Republican National Convention, then you do the Democratic National Convention, and you're able to do a few things along the way. My big following your work and following who you are, I'm going to be like, well, where are you going to be election night?
I've sort of thought about it. I mean, I imagine that Trump's going to be in Mar-a-Lago and Harris will be in Washington. So probably, right? So yeah, I don't know. It has gotten, and also too, because of the, there's increased Secret Service protection around Trump now. And obviously the president and the vice president in the U.S. have a lot of Secret Service infrastructure around them. So I'm not going to be, most likely I'm not going to be part of that pool, the White House pool at all. And probably less likely that I'll be part of the Trump one. Not less likely, but in addition, I probably won't be part of that. So I might not be with either of the candidates on election night, to answer your question.
Does that deter you?
Does what deter me?
Does that not having that access make you not want to try to cover it?
To some extent, yes, because it's sort of, just for your viewers, that if you're in one of these press pools, which both Trump and Harris have now, you can photograph close to this. You can go close to the stage. Like I said, if there's a speech, you can get right up at the edge of the stage. But there are only 4 or 5 photographers, and they're from these wire services, and they've been doing it for months now, who are part of those groups.
So they're like trusted.
Yeah, they're trusted. So if you're everybody else, all the rest of the press and pretty much all like the TV cameras and stuff, you'll be like a couple 100 feet away and bleachers shooting with a long lens, which I'm just not, that interested in doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I might go somewhere where people are watching the results come in, or I might just sit at home with a, pizza and do it that way. So
we could hang out, have a couple of whiskeys.
Let's do that. We could do a live show.
We could do a live stream on the election.
Yeah, Ryan Pyle on election night.
The Canadian.
Yeah, Ryan Pyle, the Canadian. Hey,
what does he think about the U.S. election? No, it would be funny though if you came over, if we did pizza and whiskey. Think of something better to match up with my calendar or whatever.
Right.
But it'd be funny if you came just from voting, and you came here and then we just sat and chatted it out while we watched it on a big screen.
That'd be great. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a date.
It's a deal. All right.
Anything else from the RNC that's on your mind that you haven't talked about yet?
I can't think of anything else. You've asked a lot of questions, and I've been digging around to try to answer them as best as I can. So, Nothing comes to mind, but
You did have a few things you wanted to say. I mean, I know you're super busy and you got a lot of things coming up in the next few weeks. Is there anything that you're doing kind of that you want to plug?
Well, one thing I'd like to mention is that in October of this year, so in a few months, right before the election, actually, I'm going to be doing a 2.5-day workshop, photo workshop in Los Angeles with Leica. It's the Leica Academy with a K, and it's kind of going to be based out of the Leica LA store, which is very close to here in West Hollywood. And yeah, so that'll be really cool. I did a couple with them during lockdown, so we had to do them online, where everybody was going out and shooting individually, and then we'd come back to edit over Zoom. But this time it's great. We're going to be physically present together, and we're going to go out and shoot and do editing and do some presentations. So that's coming up.
That's exciting though. Like, what does it feel like to have that kind of partnership with such a historic brand of camera, and obviously like the gold standard of cameras and lenses? Like Leica is the top of the top for anyone out there. So like, what's it like to have that kind of partnership with Leica?
It's great because I've loved their cameras since I started using them in the 90s and back in the film days, and I was also using SLRs at the time and still use, like, when I need telephoto lenses, I still, use other, mirrorless cameras and things like that. But I love the small rangefinder cameras, which is really like when I just change, you tend to shoot in a different way. And now they do make mirrorless cameras that I use with longer zoom lenses. So it's a great company. The image quality on their new sensors is great. And so I'm very happy to have kind of developed that relationship over the last few years. And yeah, it's cool to finally get to do one of these workshops now with everybody together and shooting together. And it's nice because it creates kind of feels like a team, when everybody's out there working and trying to have their own kind of progress over a few days, right? And everybody tends to be really supportive of each other. So I really like that.
That's nice because people don't understand how isolating it is to be a photographer.
Yeah, that's very true. And anytime, I have a chance to get together with other photographers, it's great. And that's actually, that is one thing I did not mention about the RNC is that I'm seeing all my friends there, which is great, who are photographers. So these are, people, in some cases that I've known for 20 years, 30 years. And so it's cool. It's like it's not just a convention of political people, it's a convention of media people. So those of us in my business, like, we get to see all our colleagues who live in different cities around the U.S. So that's great, and
it's kind of like working internationally and covering natural disasters.
Same, except not as depressing, or at least, for the same sorts of reasons. But yeah, so anyway, the workshop is called The Dynamic Frame. It's kind of mostly the theme is composition, working quickly and finding, tuning into your environment and trying to arrange your frame in a sophisticated way as things are moving, and coming up with strategies to be keen on your observation and keen and quick at getting that down onto the film or your sensor. So that's what that's about. And what else is cooking? Yeah, I have a website that I do with a friend, my partner, David Paul Morris, who's a photographer in San Francisco, and who was in Milwaukee. And we started it about a year ago. We've been talking a lot about AI, how that's impacting photography, and particularly in photojournalism, which we don't use, just to be clear about it. So it's called The Real Frame because we're really making distinctions now about traditional photography, where you're, the basics, where it's a person out there with a camera photographing things as they happen, as opposed to using Photoshop or other kind of, digital techniques to change the picture later, like generative fill or something like that. So we go into all those issues. We talk about equipment on there. So yeah, that's therealframe.com.
What's your third one? You had a third one.
Oh yeah, well no, it's just the book that we've been talking about, my book Brink, which you can find on my website. My name is David Butow, Butow. You can find me that way on Instagram and all that, and online.
And on episode 10, when you were here last, I think we went through every picture in the book and you talked about it, which was really beautiful. And I'm thankful you gave that kind of time And of course, I'll tag you on all the social media and put up your website as well. So we'll make sure we get you covered.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, buddy, let's fucking do it again anytime. I love it.
Awesome. Great to see you, Greg. Great to talk to you again.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.